Hello, my name is Ryan McBride, and welcome to Critical Thinking for the rest of us. Today's lecture, Cultivating Curiosity and Open-Mindedness. The intellectual virtues. That's what we're going to be focusing on for the next 2 weeks. This week, we'll be focusing on curiosity and open-mindedness. Next week, we'll be focusing on courage and humility. And actually, we've already focused on the intellectual virtues a little bit because we spoke about charity and skepticism last week. So this is a bit of a unique approach to starting a critical thinking series of any kind with the intellectual virtues as opposed to, say, basic argumentation, validity, soundness, and so on. But the virtue of starting with the intellectual virtues is that I'm able to show you what is the payout or what is the outcome of someone that devotes their time to practicing critical thinking. So really, what I'm doing here is just presenting you with the benefits of taking critical thinking seriously. You will become a person that has these virtues with more practice. So today, we're going to cover what the intellectual virtues are. We're going to speak in depth about curiosity as an intellectual virtue. We're going to speak in depth about open-mindedness as an intellectual virtue. And then we'll end on some practical ways that we can begin to develop curiosity and open-mindedness today. So first, it would benefit us to begin with a basic understanding of what the intellectual virtues are. Again, we went over this a little bit in the last lecture, but now we're going to devote a little bit more time to unpacking what the virtues are. So at a high level, we'll say that the intellectual virtues are fundamental qualities that enhance our ability to think critically, engage meaningfully with the world, and expand our understanding. Importantly, the concept of a virtue harkens back to the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle, who wrote the book on virtue ethics. So he wrote a book known as the Nicomachean Ethics, which you may have encountered. It's a book of ethics that he actually wrote for his son, Nicomachus. And in it, he highlights what their virtues are, how to cultivate them, and of course motivates the reason why they're important. We're focused more specifically on intellectual virtues, not virtues proper. And so the virtues that we're analyzing are virtues of the mind. Nevertheless, they share something in common with the virtues that Aristotle identified. Namely, that the virtues aren't simply things that we can go to the grocery store and purchase and then we have in our possession. The virtues are something that we actually have to actively practice and to cultivate. They take work. So as an analogy, if you want to become a world-famous rock star, for instance, say you want to be a world-famous drummer, well, you're absolutely not just going to start being one of the best drummers in the world. You're going to have to practice. And not only are you going to have to practice, you're going to have to go to the very basics of percussion, which means you're probably going to start with 2 sticks and a pad, and you're going to be tapping out rudiments to time. And that's going to take a lot of work to perfect even this most basic exercise. But that's what you have to do to get better at drumming. You have to start with rudiments. You have to start with timing. After you've gotten good with your rudiments, then you can start to apply it to a drum kit and, of course, get better and better. In the same way, the intellectual virtues are something that we have to actively practice. And we're going to start small with manageable tasks, but then through practice, we're going to be able to cultivate each virtue more and more until they become essentially second nature to us. And again, this is something that Aristotle identified, is that we are what we do repeatedly, meaning whatever we habituate in our lives, well, that's what we're going to do. And what we do is what we are as people. We are defined by the things that we do. And so if you're someone that has a lot of bad habits, well, you're the kind of person that does bad things effectively, versus someone who actively practices and rehearses the virtues and has habituated the virtues. Well, then we would say that someone that has done such a thing is a virtuous person. So really what we can say for our purposes is that the intellectual virtues are kinds of character traits or habits that we formed over time by practicing critical thinking. Like I said, we've already spoken a little bit about the intellectual virtues when we talked about charity and skepticism. So if you don't recall, charity is the idea that we should approach whatever it is we're researching with the belief that we have something to learn here, or anybody that we're conversing with. We approach them as if we have something to learn from them, because it's probably true, if not absolutely true. To balance that out, however, we have the virtue of skepticism, which asks us to put whatever we encounter into question. So even though we're charitable, we're not naive in the sense that we accept as true anything that sort of comes into our minds or is presented to us by others. Skepticism asks us to question everything. Of course, if we take skepticism too far, then we slide into cynicism, which is where we not only question everything, but we just believe that everything's false, right? And cynicism is an absolute killer. It's no good for you. It's no good for anyone. And so charity really balances that out by saying, no, there are true things in the world. I just have to go about finding them. And how I do it is the key part. That's what's up to me. And that's where that's the difference maker. If I'm someone that's receptive to the truth, then I'm much more likely to receive the truth than someone that is skeptical to the point of cynicism. So moving on, today we're going to focus specifically on curiosity and open-mindedness. So we singled these out simply because, first, curiosity, for its part, seems to be something that's utterly basic to the human experience. On the other side, open-mindedness, at least in my opinion, is so critical to look at because open-mindedness seems to be something that easily atrophies the older we get. We seem to sort of calcify in our thinking in a way where we become rigid and unwilling to, explore new boundaries of knowledge or entertain opposing positions to our own. We get really blinkered in our thinking, so we have to actively work on keeping an open mind. I don't know why that is, but that seems to be the case the older we get. So now let's look specifically at curiosity as an intellectual virtue. First, we'll define it. For our purposes, we'll say that curiosity is the intrinsic desire to learn, understand, and explore the world around us. Now, if you think about what I just said, all I've essentially done is described a child or even an infant. So I said, curiosity is the intrinsic desire to learn, understand, and explore the world around us. Yes, that's just what children do, right? All of us, by and large, are born extremely curious about our environment, and we'll go so far as to explore it at our own detriment. So we're always constantly putting ourselves in danger as children, and it's our parents that protect us from, swallowing something that's poisonous or dashing our heads against a corner or whatever it is kids do and get up to. What drives those behaviors is curiosity. And so you might argue that curiosity just identifies something fundamental about our natures as humans. We are curious things. And yet, why is curiosity important? Why should we take the time to develop it? First, curiosity naturally leads to deeper insights and a more nuanced comprehension of complex topics. What do I mean by that? The more curious we are, the more we explore. And the more we explore, the deeper our insights. And of course, the deeper our insights and the broader our insights across the domain of knowledge, the more comprehension we have of complex topics in general. So again, curiosity is the motivating force behind what drives us to seek out knowledge. It always starts with a question, but it's a question that is ensconced in interest, right? It's ensconced in excitement. It's ensconced maybe also in fear, but absolutely curiosity is motivating. Next, curiosity absolutely encourages the exploration and the application of new perspectives. So the more curious you are about the world and the more you engage with it, the more that knowledge that you've discovered is at your hands to utilize when you need. In the same vein, we can say that curiosity also absolutely leads to higher levels of resilience and the ability to adapt to novel challenges. So anytime we're faced with a novel challenge of some sort, the more broad our understanding of the world, the more likely we are to find novel solutions to those novel problems that we face. And we get to that stage of practical wisdom, this phronesis, if you will, by being guided by the driving force of curiosity. And then finally, if we cultivate our curiosity, we become what is known as a lifelong learner. And a lifelong learner, this isn't a secret here, it's not complicated. A lifelong learner is simply someone that is always open to learning, just no matter what their age, whether they're 12 or 80. Now, to give you an example of a lifelong learner, the German writer Wolfgang von Goethe is famous. He's famous for a lot of things. This man wrote a lot. But interestingly, it wasn't until much later in his life when he ended up learning the Persian language. He heard some poems in Persian, fell in love with it, and then ended up learning the language so he can compose his own poems in Persian. I'm pretty sure that's true. Now I'm sort of second-guessing myself here, but I do at least know that his collection of poetry, the West-Ostlich Divan, was inspired by Persian poetry. I'm pretty sure of that. Nevertheless, the point still stands. Goethe was absolutely a lifelong learner. He was learning languages well into the later stages of his life. And so if Goethe can do it, so can you. So those are just a few reasons why curiosity is important as an intellectual virtue. So then you might ask, well, great, but how can I cultivate curiosity? The most basic answer is to basically just mimic children. Do whatever children do when it comes to exploring the world. Just be curious. Just dive in, get messy, and have fun. Of course, what that looks like for an adult probably will be and probably should be a little different in practice than what children do. So maybe that means, you go to your local library and you just have a heyday. You find whatever it is you want to read and you don't hold back. Similarly, like maybe that looks like you just picking up that musical instrument that you've always wanted and just doing your best. Just try, because there's no consequences except for the ones that you recognize. A little bit more focused now, one way to develop curiosity is to ask open-ended questions. So what is an open-ended question? Oftentimes when we're asking a question, we don't know what the answer is, but we can gesture in the right direction. We typically have a sense of where the answer is going to come from, so it often won't take us from surprise. Sometimes we ask questions and we actually know the answer, and what we're doing is we're trying to bait the other person and giving the answer we expect of him. And so we're asking leading questions. This happens a lot in education. We ask questions in order to try to coax a certain specific answer out of the student. But then we have an open-ended question. And an open-ended question is the kind of question where, sure, we might have a sense of where the answer could come from, but the way we pose the question and our expectation of the answer is such that we're open to whatever comes. Or maybe we're actually asking a question that we don't know where the answer is going to come from at all. We're posing a question from ignorance, and we're going to speak about ignorance at length in the next lecture, actually. So asking open-ended questions furnishes the possibility for us to encounter a new world with new answers. If I'm constantly asking questions whose answers I already know, and then I'm not really giving myself space for growth. Another obvious way of cultivating curiosity is to engage in diverse reading material. Of course, reading material here doesn't mean that you're going to a library and selecting a certain set of texts or what have you. It could also mean exploring new forms of news media or social media, or however you interact with content. So a good litmus test for this is essentially, if you live in a world where everything you believe is constantly being mirrored at you, then you might live in what is known as an echo chamber, where effectively all the media, all the people, everything you engage with is simply confirming what you already know and believe. Now that's great in one sense, because obviously we're living in an idyllic world where everyone and everything agrees with what I think is right. On the other hand, this is a bit solipsistic. And what I mean by solipsistic is it's to pretend that we are the only living conscious things in the world. And that's simply not true. Solipsism is not true. We live in a world with diverse, multitudinous conscious perspectives and beliefs and desires and motivating factors. The world is very rich. And so if you're not encountering conflict of some kind in your life, then yes, you might be living in an echo chamber of sorts, and you might benefit from diversifying your quote-unquote reading material or the content that you engage in. Another practical way of Cultivating curiosity and overcoming that sense of an echo chamber is to pursue new experiences and skills. We really get comfortable doing the things that we like to do, and we really don't like to change things up on ourselves. We may like to pretend that we like change, but by and large, people are really creatures of habit. And so we have to be very careful about the habits that we form. Well, we can, as a matter of fact, make a habit out of pursuing new experiences and skills. And by doing that, we open ourselves up to new areas of exploration. So to give you a practical example, I do most of my writing by hand, and then I'll shift to my computer. But within my personal setup here, I never imagined that a typewriter would be something that I would use. It just didn't seem to have any practical purpose, right? Because if I'm typing on a piece of paper, I've generated a piece of paper, and inevitably, given the world that we live in, I'm still going to have to retype that typed sheet into a word processor of some kind so that I can post the content on my website or what have you. And so I really didn't see any practical use for a typewriter. Well, good on me. I don't know how I got the bug, but I decided I'm going to get a typewriter anyways. And I got to say, it's been one of the greatest things ever, because if there's anything in the world that has been designed for a writer, it is a typewriter. No surprise here. For the typewriter nerds out there, I actually purchased an Olympia SM7 from 1963. For the super nerds out there, it's actually the same typewriter that James Baldwin used, specifically when he wrote the book In Another Country while he was living in Istanbul. But anyways, I digress. The typewriter, I've discovered, much to my delight, is a wonderful tool for doing something very specific that I think all writers should engage in. I'm getting on a little bit of a tangent, but this also shows how curiosity can lead to new areas in the life of the mind. What that doing is copy work. So it used to be very common as a part of your education that you would sit down and write out by hand, verbatim, whatever writer or thinker or principles or what have you that you are learning about for that day in class. And something that writers used to do is to copy out verbatim, often by hand, but also by typewriter, works that they believed exemplified excellent writing. As an example, the writer Hunter S. Thompson, who wrote Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, probably typed out F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby at least 6 times, because Thompson believed it was such an exemplary piece of American writing. All told, just by being curious about this tool, I've given myself the possibility to discover a whole new world when it comes to writing, and I absolutely don't regret it. And this is something that we can all do. Maybe it's going to play piano, or learning how to sing, or how to do flower arrangement. It doesn't really matter. Just by being curious and jumping in, you're going to open up doors to whole new worlds you didn't even know about. And so finally, in terms of ways to cultivate curiosity as an intellectual virtue, keep in mind that the environment that we surround ourselves with is either going to support us or hinder us in our goals. So if we have the personal goal of becoming more of a critical thinker, to become more virtuous, or just generally to become a better version of ourselves, the environment that we surround ourselves in is going to play a very important role in that journey. So to give a practical example here, kind of an obvious one, if you surround yourself with negative people that are constantly naysaying everything that you're trying to do, that's absolutely going to hinder your progress. Better to have people around you who are going to support you in your goals and maybe even share in the journey with you. So yes, those are just a few ways that we can cultivate curiosity as an intellectual virtue. And now let's move on to open-mindedness as an intellectual virtue. So for our purposes, we'll define open-mindedness as the capacity to consider alternative ideas, viewpoints, and possibilities without immediate judgment. So I'll say that one more time. Open-mindedness for our purposes we'll define as the capacity to consider alternative ideas, viewpoints, and possibilities without immediate judgment. Notice I didn't say without judgment, because part of being a critical thinker is to put things into question and to form our own position on things. Nevertheless, what we don't want to do is to immediately judge in the way that will hinder us from personal growth. Well and good, you might say, but why is open-mindedness important? Why should we devote our time and energy to cultivating it? Well, first, people that are open-minded are often a lot more likely to embrace different or opposing worldviews. So they exhibit a lot more flexibility in their thinking and their willingness to engage in different viewpoints. This is often a good thing. Typically, people that have flexibility in their thinking and are able to adopt opposing viewpoints are able to navigate life a little bit more easily than others. Of course, too, similarly, people that are open-minded are a lot more likely to be able to grow as individuals than those that are very close-minded. Again, if we close ourselves off in our echo chambers and we constantly hear what we already believe, well, then there's nothing new coming in. And if there's nothing new coming in, resistance, opposing views, or what have you, we're not giving ourselves what we need to become different versions and better versions of ourselves. Similarly, again, open-mindedness enables us to engage in constructive dialogue. So if we proceed in our conversations with others or when we engage in media or what have you, if we proceed without immediate judgment, then we're much more likely to engage in constructive dialogue when it does come time to sounding out each other's viewpoints or whatever it might be, a person, media, etc., etc. We're much more likely to form nuanced positions on a topic if we first listen and appreciate what it is we're reading or engaging in. Another reason why open-mindedness as an intellectual virtue is so important is that it encourages a collaborative approach to problem solving. So there is sort of a toxic, I think, worldview. I had a friend, actually, she termed this the dark side of self-reliance in the United States, and I just love that. But there's this sort of poisonous idea in the US that we should be able to do absolutely everything by our own powers. And now I'm personally a very big fan of the transcendentalists, self-reliance, and all of that. But nevertheless, problems are often, if not almost always, solved through community. We have to take a collaborative approach to problem solving, at least in order to expedite solutions. And so if you're open-minded, you're a lot more likely to successfully collaborate with others on the problems that you're facing. And then finally, open-mindedness is important because it increases your capacity to empathize with others, specifically their beliefs, their cultural practices, or what have you. Again, that doesn't mean that you have to accept what they do or even agree with it, but at least you can come to understand it and find the humanity that you share within those cultural practices, even if they differ from you to the other person. So how do we cultivate open-mindedness? First, as a practical means of doing so, we can begin by acknowledging our personal biases. So remember, part of our definition of open-mindedness is not to immediately judge. We will inevitably eventually judge, and I think that's a good thing within the perspective of critical thinking. But what we want to do is to remove that immediate judgment that often happens in our minds. And we can do that by acknowledging our personal biases. We have to understand what it is we already believe, and more importantly, we have to understand why we believe the way we believe. So, no surprise, philosophy and critical thinking leads us inevitably to doing that self-work of self-exploration, of understanding who we are and why we are the way we are. So essentially, we have to engage in more self-reflection as critical thinkers to understand, where am I tripping myself up? Where am I getting in my own way? And what's preventing me from being open-minded? That often means we have to look at more of the ugly emotions we might have. So if we have certain personal biases against others, a friend or what have you, we're going to have to actually look at that revulsion or whatever it might be. It's a very strong word, but we might actually have to look at that revulsion and try to grasp why it is we have it in the first place. Is it well-founded? Is it not? It takes a lot of work. Another way to cultivate open-mindedness is to engage in active listening. Now, I don't know what it is about active listening, and I don't think it's just a me problem, but it seems to be, for many of us, just very difficult. I do at least know, speaking from my perspective, that active listening can be difficult. And it's not because personally that I think that I have something smarter and more intelligent to say, but that often when I'm engaging with others, say about a movie or a piece of writing or whatever, I just get stimulated and I get really excited and my brain starts going and then I want to share, right? I want to cooperate. But it's very important to keep in mind that part of the open-mindedness and collaborative process is actively listening, which means not contributing at all, but simply paying attention. And not only that, this might seem a little contradictory, but we can collaborate and engage with one another constructively back and forth, even when someone is merely listening. This is a wonderful act of service that you can do for yourself as well as to the person you're engaging with, is to simply listen to what they have to say. Very hard to do in practice, but it seems to make sense in theory. So this is something that I'm at least actively working on, is just trying to be quiet and to listen. Next, we can actively seek out contrasting viewpoints. Going again back to the echo chamber, if we're just constantly being told that we're right or the beliefs that we hold are correct, well then we need to actively go out and find viewpoints that contradict those beliefs. Of course, we want to be very aware of the credibility of our sources, and this is something we will eventually talk about in the series. Not everything deserves to be taken seriously, so we have to be careful about the sources that we cite, but we absolutely have to search for opposing viewpoints if we want to grow as individuals. And then finally, practicing empathy, practicing to feel what others are feeling in the moment or generally is an excellent way to open your mind. Now, that might seem to be a contradictory statement if I'm sitting here saying the life of the mind and then a life of the emotions, but keep in mind, as I've mentioned, even with curiosity, for example, is that it's often emotion that drives the curiosity, excitement, fear, exhilaration, or something like courage, which we'll speak about later. Often what drives courage first is fear. You can't really be courageous in a situation that you feel no fear in. And so, as a matter of fact, the emotions play a very large role in the life of a critical thinker. And so we have to work on our emotional knowledge as well, our emotional acuity. So those are just some ways that we can begin to cultivate open-mindedness today. And now I want to wrap up by just offering some more practical ways to develop both curiosity and open-mindedness. So there's, of course, tons of ways to do this. Here are just 3 that I've come up with. So the first thing, and this is something I try to tell my students to do at the beginning of each semester, is to keep a curiosity journal or a notebook where you keep your best ideas or the best ideas that you've encountered. This actually links us up with the way that the journal was used in the American Romantic movement. So I'm thinking again specifically of Emerson, who encouraged Henry David Thoreau to keep a journal. Emerson's idea was that a journal contained the gleanings from your exploration of the world, whether it's a play or a walk through a specific park or reading Thomas Carlyle or Montaigne or what have you, whatever it is you're doing, however it is that you engage in the world, a journal would be your repository of that journey. And specifically the best parts, including your reactions to those things that you're encountering. And not only do I think Emerson was right about this, I think it's still true today. There's even just the practical fact that by writing out whatever it is you're thinking about, you're much more likely to remember it. And it's not because you can go back and look at it, although, that's always great to do, but it's the active practice of writing with thinking with your hand that somehow solidifies that idea that you're grappling with. And so one way to cultivate curiosity and open-mindedness is to keep a track record of your explorations, whatever, again, they might be. Maybe you're a physicist, maybe you're a taxi driver, maybe you're a gardener. It doesn't matter what it is. You're still part of the human drama. You're still engaged in the world, and you can still face your world with curiosity and open-mindedness. There's always something to learn. And whatever it is you learn, you can track it in that journal. And the more you track it, the more you habituate curiosity and open-mindedness, the more you strengthen them, and the more automatic they become. Another way of cultivating curiosity and open-mindedness is to engage in special topic groups. What I mean by this is if you have a group of friends and you know that each one of you really enjoys movies, well, host a movie night. Start a monthly movie group where you all get together and you explore different films that each of you enjoy. Of course, your friend, maybe he's really into Japanese monster movies and you don't have any sort of immediate interest in that, and that's okay because you're all about, I don't know, Michael Bay movies or whatever. I'm not super great at movies, but whatever it might be. Well, you might be surprised to discover from your Japanese monster movie friend that the Japanese monster movies, I'm thinking specifically of the first Godzilla movie, they're actually really beautiful and tragic movies, at least in the beginning. And there's a lot to be learned about the human experience from watching them. The first Godzilla movie, truly, if you haven't seen it, I would encourage you to watch it. It's really heartbreaking, though. But nevertheless, the point stands. By creating special topic groups around whatever special topic it is that you enjoy, whether it's knitting or movies or philosophy texts or Wolfgang von Goethe, right? By coming together in a group, you're fostering the probability that you're going to encounter viewpoints that differ from the ones that you hold. And that's a great thing. And so finally, perhaps you don't have a lot of friends that are interested in some special topic that you're interested in. So for example, for a while I was really, really into fountain pens. And, unless you're a 70-year-old white guy, you're probably not going to find a lot of friends that are also interested in fountain pens. It's a bit of a lonely interest. And that's okay. That doesn't mean that your interest in fountain pens or whatever it might be can't lead you to new horizons of knowledge. So what I would encourage you to do is simply develop a personal learning project of sorts where, you really dive into that special topic that you have and try to explore as much as possible about that topic, but not confining yourself to the most obvious way of learning about it, which for many of us would be just to search it on the internet, watch some YouTube videos or what have you. But also dive into old magazines from the library to look at the old ads from the fountain pens. I'm stuck on this example because it's what's in my head right now. But there's different ways you can list out, well, how can I engage at a different angle with this special topic? There's all kinds of ways of going about this. And by pursuing these different methods and pursuing that topic, you're just giving yourself a playground to be curious and also to learn more than what you already knew. And I think that's pretty cool. So that's my thoughts on curiosity and open-mindedness as intellectual virtues. And now I would like to segue to the reflection question section of this lecture, where I ask you I'm going to leave you with 3 different reflection questions for you to take up on your own time, to think about, to ponder, to dismiss, to write on, whatever it is you want to do, just to keep the conversation going, not only here, but at least in your mind, since, it's not easy for us to interact, especially synchronously, given the format of these lectures. So here it goes. The first question I want to ask you is, do you find yourself to be a curious individual? If so, what do you do to keep your curiosity alive? If not, when did you lose your curiosity? Next question. What are some ways in which you are close-minded? What reasons do you have for being close-minded? Do you have good reasons? Maybe you do. Is it possible for you to explore contrary viewpoints to your own without you needing to change your mind on that viewpoint? Final question. In what ways can you cultivate curiosity and open-mindedness in your specific day-to-day life, given your circumstances, given the world that you inhabit? So we covered a lot of ground today. First, we talked about what the intellectual virtues are. Then we looked in depth at curiosity as an intellectual virtue, shifted our attention to open-mindedness as an intellectual virtue, and then throughout, and in summary, reflected on ways of developing curiosity and open-mindedness today. So next week, we're going to continue the conversation, and we're going to look at courage and humility. So stay tuned.